So one articulation exercise that I actually created.
Recently this spot came onto my screen where Patrick Bartley is explaining some great articulation exercises. And then there's this where Michael Brecker, as always, is playing with super articulation and super timing. How does he do this? One thing is for sure, when we play music, articulation, timing, phrasing is so much integrated into our playing, so we need to have this well under control. I want to dig into how we articulate when we are playing jazz music. And when you're training articulation, this will both develop your phrasing and your timing. And I'll use these two greats to get me some help. Let's right away start with getting some facts right about articulation. Michael Brecker says in his practice book, the timing is in your fingers. And yes, he's definitely right. Timing is in our fingers. And what has this to do with articulation? Our articulation needs to be exactly as precise as our fingers, else it won't work. So we need to start with our fingers. I want to demonstrate to you why our fingers are so important for the timing. So this is a quite basic line on the 2-5-1 in G, A minor D7 G, and in this way we can explain how our fingers work with timing. I want to ask you to try to play this line for yourself. So when I'm playing this line, you hear the difference when I'm articulating and when I'm not articulating. The timing when I'm not articulating needs to be exactly as precise. It needs to sound good without articulation, and it needs to sound really tight. So let's try to speed up this line into tempo 200. What I see when I speed up lines and playing faster, I get dependent on the articulation. I do not want that. I want my fingers to be just as tight without articulation, because this is exactly where the timing is. For us to do this, we need to get rid of old habits about articulation fixing our timing. So when you play these lines, try to hear the difference. What do you do when you're playing without articulation, and what do you do when you're playing with articulation? For me, there's a huge difference, because when I'm playing with articulation, the articulation takes over the timing and my fingers are second. I don't want that. I want my fingers to be first and the articulation should be on top. So what happens is I tend to rush when I articulate. The articulation changes the tone and the phrasing of the line, of course. So you need to be flexible with your articulation. You need to be on top, that it's an extra add-on you have in your pocket. So I want to get to this Patrick Bartley exercise because it's really awesome. But let's start a little bit easier. Now, just take the metronome and play with this a bit. Follow this exercise, so try to play along or play it afterwards. I start with the exercise on all 4 beats. And as you hear, I do not play any articulation. I just try to get my fingers tight on all the 4 beats. Really lock into the metronome sound. So the next exercise would be half the metronome, playing exactly the same exercise. Lock into the sound of the metronome with your fingers. And now you hear that you need to get independent for a longer time, that you're hearing it on 2 and 4. It takes you away from the 1. You need to feel that 1. You need to own that 1 and only have the 2 and the 4 to aim for. And in this way, you're actually creating your own strong beat on the 1 and the 3. And now we're getting to it, because you need to be your own metronome. You want the strongest timing, and this means you need to own that metronome. You need to be your own metronome. Imagine that your fingers are small drumsticks and they are tapping onto the saxophone in the timing. He wrote in his practice book, press hard. What did he mean with this? Well, press hard to get the timing exact. Play the drumsticks. Your fingers are the drumsticks. Feel the impact of your fingers on your instrument and let this be your timing. The exercise I show you here are just a few of the exercises I put into the deep dive collection on Patreon. There's so much to say about articulation and timing, and there are so many great exercises you can just take out and use. Find the ones you like the best and that gives you the best possible progression in your playing. So if you want to get better timing, better articulation and play better phrases, I really recommend you to grab it. Go to the link below in the description. Now we work with no articulation for some time. Now it's basically just add articulation. So with the next bunch of exercises, I want to show you how we can just add articulation. So the articulation becomes a second layer in your playing. This means that you can manipulate the phrasing with your articulation and make it into your own sound. So we'll start easy. You already have the fingers going, so now we'll just add articulation into the mix. Start out with articulation on all tones. All the 8 notes need an articulation point. In this way, the articulation strongly supports the timing, and you get to train your tongue. The tongue movement needs to be flexible, but it also needs to be fast. You need to be able to move your tongue at the same speed as 10 fingers. To really make articulation an add-on, try turning it on and off. Every time you play the exercise, play it either with or without. So if you repeat the exercise, play it one time with articulation, second time without. This exercise, you clearly hear the difference between when you are articulating and when you are not articulating the line. And you need to fix that gap between those two sounds. Of course, articulation should be powerful, but your fingers and your timing should be just as powerful. Now, switch the articulation to all 4 beats. This gives you more space and forces you to focus on the tongue, that it doesn't have to move on every tone but every second tone. We're changing the exercises because we want a flexible articulation. You want to be able to add it exactly where you want. And now I want to go back to Bartley's super awesome exercise. I think I'm making an own interpretation of the exercise. But what we do now, when you're playing this scale, you articulate on the 1, the 5 and the 9, what Bartley says. So the 1, the 1st degree of the scale, the 5th degree of the scale and the 9th degree of the scale. And in this way you get your own metronome beat when you play this scale. Bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom, middle, top, and so on and so on. And this gives you an incredible feel of flow when you play the line. This secures your timing in your inner ear, but also the timing in your fingers. You get a stability and exactly what I'm talking about, the flow of the timing. So articulation should be a part of your timing, not a thing that fixes your timing. So you should have these 2 layers that you can add the articulation onto your timing. You must check out a little bit of Sonny Stitt here. Or Charlie Parker, or any of the greats. But Sonny Stitt is a perfect example on great articulation. When playing jazz articulation, you play the accent, the articulation on the 2nd of the 8 notes. And this gives you a really natural swing feel. So train this, start slow, play it with the scales. The exercises are in the lesson manual on Patreon. But start slow, play it with a drum track. Because if you play with a play along, you listen to all these chords and the bass and all that kind of stuff. If you just play with the drum track, it's much easier to follow. Not just the metronome. The metronome is your friend. When you play a real phrase, it's not like you add jazz articulation. You just add articulation. Because you will have articulation all over the place. Sometimes you accent a tone, sometimes you play a whole phrase with jazz articulation, and sometimes you're just like hitting some tones here and there. And it totally also depends on the tempo you're playing. So if you're playing slow, you can articulate much more. If I'm playing fast, I tend to articulate less. To get the absolute best articulation and the best timing, I really recommend you to check out the deep dive articulation and timing manual on Patreon. This is a collection of exercises and a collection of licks that takes you through the timing. Together with the exercises and together with the licks, I've added small text that says how you can manipulate them, how you can articulate it, how you can play it without articulation. The link to Patreon and the deep dive lesson manual PDF is right below in the description. The absolute best combination of exercise or how you can learn better articulation and better timing is listen to the greats, grab their style, play it, learn it, steal it, borrow it. This is the video for you to check out. Play music, have fun.